So if you are inside the United States and you are on a visa, carefully consider whether or not you want to travel internationally. If you travel internationally and Trump enacts the travel ban, then there's a risk that you may not be able to return to the United States. And if you are inside the US, you're on a visa, and you decide you do want to travel internationally, expect that when you return, you will be questioned more about your travels, your background, even your social media activity, your political views, and what you did when you were traveling abroad. And again, if you are considering traveling internationally and you are on a visa, you really should consult with an attorney about your specific situation. And nothing can really replace the advice that an attorney can give you about your situation. If you are outside the United States and you want to come to the United States, consider coming now before a travel ban is enacted, because once a ban is enacted, then there's a risk you may not be able to enter. And the longer you wait to enter the United States, the more likely it is that it's going to become harder and harder to get inside. So if you have friends or family members who are outside of the United States who have visas, encourage them to come now. Even coming now, they still may face difficulties. So some of those difficulties might be like intensive screening and inspection, and again, they should also consult with an immigration attorney if they are outside of the United States. So now I'm going to get into a section which is going to talk about your rights while traveling, and this applies to everyone, citizens and non-citizens, and I'll explain some of the differences as we talk about each of these topics. So I'm going to cover searches, seizures, denial of entry, extra questioning, access to attorney, and detention. So beginning with searches. So are border officials allowed to search your phone and your luggage? The answer is yes. For visa holders, they can search. Green card, they can search. Citizens, they can search. And if you're out of status, they can also search. So they're always able to search your luggage and your devices at the border. Now, because that's the case, there are certain things that you can do to protect yourself and to be in a better situation if this happens to you. So the first thing to know is that no border official can force you to give your phone password or cannot force you to unlock your device. However, if you are a visa holder, you may be denied entry into the United States if you refuse to provide your password. If you're a green card holder, you still may be denied entry, but generally that should not be for refusing to answer questions. They would have to show like there's a specific reason they're denying you as a green card holder. That could be criminal activity. It could be that you were out of the country for too long. Reasons like that. And then for citizens, you should know that you cannot be denied entry to the United States because you're a citizen. It is your right to enter the United States. So if you refuse to provide your password or unlock your phone device and they ask you to, this may lead to delays and they may question you more. However, if you do give them your password and you do unlock your device, there's no guarantee that they won't question you. There's no guarantee that they won't just let you through. That they won't stop you or not let you through. So just consider the pros and cons of it, that you can not provide it, and then if you don't provide it, you may risk the delay, but then even if you do provide it, you're still risking the delay. So it's a difficult situation because everyone has less rights at the border because it's not considered U.S. land. So it's just an area where you have less rights in general. And so it's important to just consider the pros and cons of providing a password. Sorry, I just wanted to mention one more thing about devices and searches. So one thing that is recommended if you're traveling is to use a separate phone or device than what you would normally use. So this could be called like a burner phone. It could be like a cheap phone that you just buy at the store and you just take it with you only for traveling, and it's not your actual phone that you use every day. You can also try not to take your laptop or computer. And then another thing to do is don't use facial recognition on your phone, the one that unlocks your phone with your face. Use a password that you set. And the reason is because it's harder to unlock if you have a password versus if you use the facial recognition. And then you can also, if they take your phone, which we'll talk about later, you can do certain things like get a receipt and note down who took it. But we'll discuss that later. But just as a reminder, like even if you, let's say like you have WhatsApp and you think you're going to travel and you're like, let me delete some of my messages on WhatsApp, or let me delete my photos, they still may be able to access that. So that is not really a safe way. And if you have any concerns at all, the best way would be to just get a separate phone for traveling. And then I think another thing I wanted to mention to you all is if you are subjected to, if they say they want to physically search you, you can ask to be searched in a private area by someone of the same gender. If they're asking to remove hijab, you can ask for being wanded. And then if they say they have to remove it, you can ask to be searched in a private room with someone of the same gender. Okay, so can they seize your property? So seize means like take your property. And the answer is yes, they can. So regardless of whether you're a citizen, a green card holder, or out of status, the border agents can take your stuff. So if your property is taken, ask for the officers' names, badges, numbers, and what agency they work for, and write it down. And you can call the agency after and request a receipt documenting that your item was taken away. Another thing you can do is you can say that you do not consent to the search, and that way they won't assume that you're agreeing. But just again, with everything, know that anything you do can cause more delays. So can they question you extra at the airport? The answer is yes. They can question anybody. They can pull anybody aside to question them, whether you're a visa holder, green card holder, citizen, or out of status. So when it comes to asking questions about religion or politics, if you're a US citizen or a green card holder, you can say, I'm not comfortable answering questions about my religious or political beliefs or about who I know. And they should not use that as a reason to arrest you or detain you, because that's illegal. However, if you are a visa holder, then they technically, so then you can say the same thing that you don't want to answer, but just know that they may deny you entry into the country. And then if you are being questioned, you can consider asking for your attorney. So we'll kind of get into whether or not you have a right to an attorney. But if you have your G28 form, that form should say your attorney's name on it, and it'll say then an attorney represents you. So if you're pulled aside for questioning and you feel you have to answer the questions, stick to simple answers. Yes, no, I don't know, I don't remember. There's no need to provide extra information. But one most important thing that you all should remember is do not lie, because if you lie to the officials, it's considered a crime. And so that's really important that you stick to the truth. However, you can say as little as possible. Oh, I wanted to say one more thing actually about questioning. So you can, if you think you're being pulled aside, so you know when you travel, there's the big long customs line, and then you come up, they call your number, you come up, and the person asks you a couple of questions, the officer. So usually what would happen is if they want to question you more, they'll pull you aside for what's called secondary questioning. So you'll be pulled out of that regular line that everybody is in, and you may be taken to a separate room. So if you're being pulled aside, you can text a friend or family member in the United States and say, I'm being pulled aside for extra questioning. Please contact my attorney. So a good idea would be to keep somebody in mind who you can tell that information to. So with respect to if they do pull you aside, are you allowed to have an attorney? So in general, no, because it's again not technically the United States. You haven't entered the United States yet, and so you have less rights. However, there are two situations in which you absolutely have a right to an attorney. That is if you are being detained on suspicion of a crime and if you are taken into ICE custody. If it's not clear to you whether you're being detained on suspicion of a crime, you can ask. And if they say yes, then you should absolutely ask for your attorney and remain silent. If they're telling you you're being taken into ICE custody, you should absolutely ask for an attorney. And another thing you can do is keep your attorney phone number with you on a piece of paper in case they take your phone away. And you can also consult with your attorney before traveling if you have any concerns. So another question is, can they detain you at airports? Yes, they can detain you. They usually don't detain you for more than 72 hours. They would usually detain you for less than 72 hours and then transfer you, like if they're going to transfer you to ICE custody, they'll detain you for a short period of time and then transfer you. Or they might transfer you to criminal custody if you're a U.S. citizen. But once they do transfer you, you should definitely ask for an attorney. And and if you're being questioned for like a few hours, you can also ask for an attorney. They may say no, but it doesn't hurt to ask. So we discussed this a little earlier, but just as a reminder, before you travel, you can inform someone in the U.S. that you are traveling and you'll be contacting them if you're detained. Give them your attorney's contact information, and then if you are pulled aside, after the first interview, you can text this to your friend. So there has been a rise in detentions of green card holders at airports. So in Boston, there was a German green card holder who was detained, I think, for over 24 hours. It was most likely due to a misdemeanor charge for marijuana possession, although I don't know if it's 100% clear why he was detained. And then another green card holder was detained in Seattle for an over 20-year-old embezzlement conviction. So if you have an old conviction or you have any type of criminal record, you should 100% consult an attorney before you decide to travel. Hello again, everybody. Earlier we were talking about travel rights and what are your rights at airports, and can you be denied entry into the United States? So the only group of people who cannot ever be denied entry into the US is citizens. So if you are a US citizen, you have the right always to enter the United States. If you are not a citizen, you can be denied, but it depends on the reason. So if you have a visa, you have the least amount of rights. So you can be denied for refusing to answer questions or for many other reasons that the border officials might come up with. If you have a green card, you have a little bit more rights than the visa holder. So you would be denied if they suspect you of criminal activity, if you left the country for too long, if there's a national security reason. But you should, as a green card holder, you should not be denied for refusal to answer religious and political questions or for refusal to unlock your device. So those are two rights that you have, but just be aware that it is a difficult time right now and it's hard to predict what the government officials are doing. So if you are a non-citizen, just be very careful when you're traveling. So I just have a short quiz just to help us understand some of the ideas we talked about. So you can feel free to shout out the answers if you know. So the first question is, can you be denied entry into the US if you are a US citizen? Wow, good job. You guys all got that right. Okay. Oh, we didn't talk about this, but I'm going to let you guys take a guess. Can your green card be revoked by a border official? Wow, great job. That's correct. No, your green card cannot be revoked by a border official. It can only be revoked by an immigration court judge. Can you be arrested for refusing to answer questions at the airport? No. Correct. So you can be detained at the airport, but you cannot be arrested criminally for refusing to answer questions at the airport. That is not a crime. If you are a visa holder, can you be denied entry into the US? Right, correct, you can. Should you ever lie to a border official? No, you should not. Should you volunteer extra information to a border official? Never. Correct. Great job. I hope that you all learned something from this. I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Caroline now. She's going to talk about your rights when protesting. And we're going to quickly switch seats.
All right, thanks Ruth for that really helpful information. I know that travel is a big area of concern for a lot of folks right now. I think another big area of concern for folks due to everything we're seeing in the news and what's happening is the question of what are your rights to protest? And we'll also explore the question of are those rights affected depending upon your status in the US, whether you're a US citizen or are on some immigration status. So these are all questions we're going to explore. I'm also going to provide some information on how you can mitigate the risk to yourself, whether that's like practical safety tips while at a protest or when deciding to attend a protest, or even about, protecting yourself online. And then I'm also going to kind of talk through some of the things we've seen recently. I want to provide the preface before we get started that this is just to give you all the information you need to make informed decisions. But it is never to discourage you from protesting or being politically active. It's just so that you know what's going on and you can make the best decisions for yourself. So I just want to say that in advance because a lot of what I get into is very technical or especially right now seems a little doom and gloom. But I just want to preface it with you can always make the decisions that are best for you. This is not individualized advice. If you have particular concerns, again, please, seek out legal counsel, seek out advice from an attorney about your particular situation, and then go from there. Okay, your right to protest with a nice little graphic of what that might look like. Okay, so generally, your rights to protest in the United States are strongest on the streets, sidewalks, and parks. These are very traditionally public places. And because they're public places, they are meant to be spaces for expression. So that is why a lot of times you see these locations being the site of protests. You also have the right to speak out on other public property. This could be like plazas in front of government buildings, so as long as you're not blocking access to the building or interfering with other purposes. So there's some spaces that are also available that are not streets, sidewalks, and parks, but you can, if you have a particular question about a particular location, if you happen to be organizing a protest, just look into that specifically. And so, yeah, one of the foundations of our Constitution, our rights in this country, is we, under the Constitution, have what's called freedom of speech. This protection protects the content of your speech, no matter how unpopular. And that's really like a very, very fundamental aspect of our democracy. However, it is not unlimited. It does not protect a couple categories of speech, which I've listed on the slide, but it's slander, libel, obscenity, true threats, or speech that incites imminent violence or breaking the law. You don't need to know exactly what these mean, and in fact, they have often very particular legal definitions. So again, if you are concerned that your speech might fall into one of these categories, you can always look into that more closely. But these categories are very, very limited. And so the main takeaway is that generally the content of your speech is protected in this country. This is just a little bit of information about how you may be able to, express your speech. One thing that we often see at protests is the use of megaphones and bullhorns. These may be used, but sometimes permits are required for other noise-making things like loudspeakers, music, drums. So, of course, if you plan to be, using any of these devices for creating sound or organizing a protest, check your local ordinances for permit information and just make sure you're abiding by whatever laws are in place. This is a little bit about photography and videography at protests. When you're lawfully present in a public space, you do have the right to photograph or video anything in plain view, which includes federal buildings and the police. I mean, I think we've seen maybe videos online where the police are like, don't film me, turn off your camera, but you do have a right to do that in public spaces where you're lawfully permitted to be. The only exception to this is that if you're on private property, the owners of that private property, they might set rules related to photography or videography. So keep that in mind. But yeah, if you're on the sidewalk or on a street, you are allowed to do these things. In a related note, police officers are not allowed to confiscate or demand to view your photographs or video without a warrant. It goes to kind of the seizure aspect of things. They also can't delete a photo. So if you take a picture of a police officer and they snatch your phone and try to delete the picture, that's not something that they're permitted to do. We'll get into a little bit later about how to navigate situations where law enforcement officers might not be following the law, because that happens. But just so that you know, they are not allowed to do that. The one thing that they can do is they may order you to cease activities that they determine are interfering with law enforcement operations. So there are situations where they may give you a lawful order. So just keep that in mind. Another thing that we've seen be an issue at certain protests is the kind of clashing of protesters and counter-protesters. So one of the things we have to keep in mind is that in as much as you have the right to free speech, counter-protesters also have free speech rights. However, they can't physically disrupt the protest they are against, just as you shouldn't be physically disrupting their protest. And then police must also treat both groups equally. Police, however, are permitted to keep antagonistic groups separated, but should allow them to be within sight and sound of one another. So that has become more of a situation in recent months, so just keep that in mind. And then I want to go through a little bit of what may happen if in the context of a protest, police stop you. This is something that may happen. We've seen it happen. And so I want to give you the best advice to keep yourself safe. I also want to preface this advice with, while you have certain rights and there are certain things the police may and may not do, they don't always follow the law. And so the advice we're giving right now, the general advice we're giving, is to keep yourself safe in the best way that you can. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's ever your responsibility to ensure the police are following the law or not, harming individuals. But at the end of the day, your safety and health is the most important. So that's why we're framing the advice in the way we are. So the first most important thing to do is just stay calm in these situations. These are 3 really important things to remember. One is make sure to keep your hands visible. Again, this relates to the idea that you can't control what they do, but you can control what you do, and keeping your hands visible makes you less of a threat oftentimes in their eyes, which can help keep you safe. In the same way, do not argue, resist, or obstruct the police, even if you believe they're violating your rights, because that could just lead to you putting yourself or you being in more danger. Even if, it's due to them violating the law, the primary concern is keeping you safe at that point in time. And then, of course, point out that you're not disrupting anyone else's activity and that the First Amendment protects your actions. Sometimes law enforcement can use that reminder, even if you shouldn't have to remind them. One note of importance is that some states require you to identify yourself. So it's really important to know in advance whether your state or the state you're protesting in has that requirement. If you must identify yourself, you may present a state-issued identification document or another form of documentation issued in the U.S. And then if you're stopped, always ask the officer if you're free to leave. If the answer is yes, the best thing you can do is just walk away. Take yourself out of that situation. If you are being detained, if they indicate to you that you are being detained, ask the officer what crime you're suspected of committing, and remind the officer, for example, that taking photographs is your right under the First Amendment, and that doesn't constitute reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. If you are under arrest, you have the right to ask why. Otherwise, the best thing you can do is say that you wish to remain silent and you ask for a lawyer, and then at that point, remain silent. Don't say anything or sign anything without a lawyer present who is representing you. That is always the best thing you can do. Even if, oftentimes I think folks think, I wasn't doing anything wrong, so if I just explain that, it will be okay. That's a very strong impulse, but remember that not saying anything without a lawyer is the best thing you can do for yourself. And ultimately, if you're not doing anything wrong, that will be figured out, but you really should not be speaking about anything. Can you show me what's in your bag? Can you, take off your coat and show me what's in the pockets? Just things that seem less explicit, but the officers may nonetheless think that, you're implying consent to a search if you comply with those questions, or you show, the inside of your bag. So just make sure to say, I don't consent to a search, and don't offer the police officer to look in any bag or pocket or whatever. And then finally, police may pat down your clothing if they suspect you have a weapon, and they may search you after an arrest. So those are 2 situations where they are allowed without your consent to kind of search you. These are a couple other tips around what may arise in the context of protests, which is law enforcement interactions. It's really helpful to keep phone numbers and other essential information on your person. A lot of folks will write them in Sharpie on their arm. In the case that they're detained or arrested, it's so that you have it. It's not on your phone in case you lose track of that or it's taken away from you. If you are arrested, you're allowed to make up to 3 local phone calls. So keep that in mind. A parent with a custody of minor children can make 2 additional phone calls in order to arrange childcare. But ideally, one of those phone calls is to an attorney, if you know of one, or to someone who can help arrange that. This is a helpful note. If you are arrested for an infraction and you have a valid ID on you, the police must give you a ticket and release you on the spot unless you refuse to sign the ticket. So for minor infractions, if you don't want to be in the situation of having to go to the police station or getting more embroiled in a lengthy interaction with law enforcement, they have to release you and give you a ticket if you sign it. So that's a good thing to know. Okay, so now I want to move on to the particular concerns that immigrants or folks who are non-U.S. born citizens may have about participation in protests. I do want to note at this time, there's a quote on the slide. Folks who are non-U.S. citizens and immigrants generally have had a long history of resistance to oppression in the United States and participating in protests. So even though I'm going to, note some risks or some areas of heightened concern, I just want to acknowledge the role that immigrants have always played in advancing our civil liberties and being politically active in the United States. So the first thing I can say is that free speech as a constitutional right applies to everyone in the United States regardless of immigration status. However, and this is a big however, courts are not consistent in defending the First Amendment rights of immigrants. So folks who are non-citizens, and even folks who are naturalized U.S. citizens, you should plan carefully because you cannot rely on the courts to perfectly and fully protect your First Amendment rights. That's an unfortunate reality. Similarly, there is a right to be free from retaliation. So while it's against the law to retaliate against you for exercising your rights to free speech and protest, however, in the past and right now in the news, we're seeing how immigrant leaders, activists, international students are being arrested and detained as retaliation for speaking out. So therefore, if you are concerned about your immigration status and you're deciding whether to participate, especially in the more high-profile protests, you should think carefully about the risks to you specifically, maybe seek out counsel about what those risks could be. Create a safety plan. I already had that bullet point. Yes, consult with a trusted immigration lawyer. It's really important that you get individualized legal advice around your particular situation. I just wanted to highlight two cases that we've seen in the news. I'm sure many of us. One is Mahmoud Khalil, who was a grad student at Columbia. He was on a student visa at the time, but since then he attained a green card. And he was a very visible activist for Palestinian rights. He was recently apprehended by ICE and is currently in ICE detention despite being, on a green card. And in this situation, it was very clear that it was because of his activism that he was targeted by the administration. A DHS spokesperson claimed, I guess you could say okay, so Trump on Truth Social, he was like, he's a radical foreign pro-Hamas student. So it's clearly retaliation for political activism. So if maybe that was more subtle in the past, it is very clearly happening on purpose, and it is targeting speech of individuals. So we have to just keep that in mind. This is unfortunately the time that we're living in. So what you do politically may impact you, unfortunately. Another example is Yonseo Chung, who was also a student at Columbia. She had not been an organizer of protests, but she had participated in them. And ICE had an administrative warrant for her arrest. It was blocked by a federal judge. And the basis of that is that this is fully retaliation for her activism. But we're still seeing this play out. Okay, and so now I'm going to talk through the specific rights that non-U.S. citizens have when interacting with law enforcement. Similarly, you do have the right to remain silent and refuse to answer questions asked by law enforcement. This includes police officers and immigration agents. And to law enforcement, you do not have to disclose your immigration status, country of origin, date of birth, date of entry into the U.S., or any other immigration-related information. Furthermore, like we said with the previous, remain silent and ask for attorney, you should not volunteer information. But if you do choose to answer questions for any reason, which we highly recommend against, Do not provide any false information, and especially not any false documentation, as that could lead to serious consequences for you. You also have a protection against unlawful searches. You do not have to, nor should you, consent to a search of yourself or your belongings. So again, I do not consent to a search, and then proceed to not consent to a search, but obviously don't resist if they're forceful in searching you. You also have a right to contact an attorney. If you're arrested or detained, you have the same right, so please contact an attorney. And this is just a little bit about documentation. If you are a lawful permanent resident, you should carry a copy of your green card with you. But for everyone, do not, or you should avoid carrying documents issued by other countries. And then definitely for everyone, do not carry any false documentation. It's really important. These are some things you can do in situations where you assert your rights, but nonetheless you feel like they have been violated. There are some steps you can take. The first thing you should do is write down everything you remember, including like if it's from an interaction with law enforcement, write down the officer's badge numbers, patrol car numbers, if they give you their name, what agency they work for, and then, seek out the contact information of those around you who witnessed it, because that can be really helpful. And then if you're injured or, there's any physical harm to you from the interaction, you should take photographs of those injuries. And then once you have all this information, you can file a written complaint with the agency's Internal Affairs Division, or sometimes there's a civilian complaint board. And this is a way to make a record of what has happened to you, and also hopefully to hold those officers accountable. I also have a few safety tips. And so this is, if you do choose to attend a protest, here's how you can stay safe and reduce your risk. So the first thing you should do is create a safety plan. And so this includes contact information for an attorney that can be readily available. You can put their number on your arm in Sharpie, as we talked about before. You could find and record information on bail fund assistance programs and organizations that provide legal support. National Lawyers Guild does a lot of this, and they have hotlines that are regional, so that if you're at a protest and a bunch of people start getting arrested, they jump into action and they start trying to get people released from jail. And then also you can get contact information of the organizers of the protests or other local support networks. This is some advice around the actual day of the protest and what is best to wear and not wear. You should wear comfortable clothes, and you should cover most of your skin, both to protect against like sunburn, but also in the case that like pepper spray or tear gas is used. And also we highly recommend eye protection, sunglasses, things like that, to protect against the same risks. You should bring extra clothes, water and snacks, your ID, emergency contact info, prescription meds, basic first aid, all these things that you could need over the course of a long protest. But also in case, if you are arrested and held in detention, it's important to have any medication that you may need at that time. Some don'ts. You should avoid wearing contacts. And this one's a hard one for me because I wear contacts and I don't like wearing my glasses. But unfortunately, if you do have, tear gas or pepper spray used on you, it can actually trap those chemicals to your eye and cause further damage. And that's the same reason why we advise against like mineral oil or like oil-based sunscreen, because they can also trap the chemicals. And then lastly, if you have long hair, we recommend wearing it up and avoiding jewelry that can get caught or snagged or yanked, just to keep yourself as safe as possible. On kind of a different note, there are ways to reduce your risk around digital privacy in protests. So one thing we recommend is leaving mobile devices at home. But if you do need to take a phone, in the same way we advised for, airport travel, you should turn off facial recognition and the fingerprint system so that they can't get into the phone without you providing the password. There have been instances of law enforcement, taking someone's phone, holding it up to their face, and suddenly it's unlocked. So we recommend, reducing the risk that the police have access to your devices and what's on your devices. We also recommend to use encrypted messaging applications, especially if you're talking about a protest or organizing or, connecting to organizers. So, Signal's probably the best. WhatsApp is good too, but it's better to do that than use just like iMessage or other platforms that are less protected against data breaches. And then this is another one which you have to make a judgment call for your own particular situation. Obviously, posting photos online and videos can really help bring awareness to the movement or to the protest and help, raise knowledge of the issue. However, it can also link people to those protests. And with the repression we've seen, especially if you're a non-US citizen, you really should consider the risk of being tied to protests or visibly at protests due to photos and videos being posted online. In addition, immigration officials can monitor your social media, and so that's something to keep in mind. It could affect you when traveling or in other situations. Okay, so that's the protest section. And then the last section we want to cover is about interactions with ICE and what you can do to best protect yourself and navigate those situations, and also, help navigate if family members or coworkers are also dealing with these interactions for some reason. So what we have on the slide right here is a red card that we often hand out to people, and I think we have some here that we can hand out, and you can hand out to friends and family. But essentially, it is a little card that says, "I do not wish to speak with you, answer your questions, sign or hand you documents based on my Fifth Amendment right under the Constitution." And there's some other things listed on there, but one of the great things about this is if, for example, ICE were to come to your home, you can slide this under the door, and it is a very great way to affirmatively say, "I'm not consenting to you entering," because sometimes, and we might get into this in more detail, but sometimes if you do open the door to immigration officials, they can take that as "Oh, you're letting me in." So this is a really good way to make sure that you're keeping, you're keeping your door closed, you're keeping your family or whoever you're with as safe as possible. So we'll hand out some of those after the presentation. So the first thing I want to cover, which I kind of previewed, is what do you do if ICE comes to your home? The first thing you do is do not open the door. If you can, ask through the door which agency the officers are with and why they are there. If they want to enter, you should ask to see if they have a warrant. And if they do, if they say, "We do have it, we'll show you, just open the door," just instead ask them to slide it under the door. If at all possible, keep the door closed. This is a sample judicial warrant. It's kind of hard to see on the screen. It's a little bit smaller, but we can maybe coordinate to send examples to folks. One thing to keep in mind is that there are situations where immigration enforcement officials will say, "Oh, we have a warrant," and they'll pass you something that is not, in fact, a valid judicial warrant. So it's really important to not only ask for it, but also review what it says and whether it is a valid judicial warrant signed by a judge. So these are the things that you are required to have on a valid judicial warrant, and so things you can look for to make sure that it is in fact a valid judicial warrant. It's going to be signed by a state or federal judge or magistrate. It will not be signed by an immigration officer or an immigration judge. So that's the first thing you can look for. It has to be issued within the past 14 days. So check the date on it and cross-reference with the current date. And then finally, it has to describe the correct address or names of the persons to be arrested. So you can check for that as well and make sure it's accurate and applicable to your particular situation. And if these things are missing, then it is most likely not a valid judicial warrant. Okay, so we're going to talk through a situation of what if they do have a warrant and you let them in? You still nonetheless have the right to remain silent. If there's a situation where they don't have a warrant or they say they do but they won't show you and they nonetheless force their way inside, to keep yourself safe, please do not resist them forcing themselves in and remain calm. Again, you can say, "I wish to remain silent," and please do so. If you are arrested, remain silent. There's a theme here. Often our advice is just remain silent without an attorney. Use a Know Your Rights card if you have one, and you can call a local rapid response hotline. There are often hotlines that allow you to report either you've had an interaction with ICE or you see ICE activity, and so you can definitely call those. And they allow folks to know what's going on and also to coordinate and help people out. Okay, so this is a little bit different of an issue, but it does happen. So how do you prepare for and respond to a situation where ICE comes to your workplace? It's a little bit different than your home. So ICE can enter public areas of a workplace. So this is without a warrant. So this is like customer areas or a lobby or an entranceway or places where like people can kind of come in. However, ICE must have a judicial warrant or consent to enter private areas of the workplace. So this is like staff-only areas or private offices, that kind of thing. And so, of course, where they are required to have a warrant, all of the same guidelines for what to do if they approach your house apply in those situations. Definitely do not give them consent to enter those private areas. And in fact, in California, it's illegal for the employer to give permission to ICE to enter private areas of the workplace where there are workers. It is important, I mean, even though that's the law, it's great to educate your employer on this requirement in advance so they don't accidentally give permission, even though under law they're not supposed to. And so if they do have a judicial warrant that allows ICE to enter private areas, observe to make sure that agents do not search areas not listed on the warrant. So the warrant will be specific, and so if it says, this is just an example, but they're going to search this office, they shouldn't then use that as like blanket authority to go search other places that are not specifically listed on the warrant. It is important in these situations to stay calm and to not run. If there is a discreet way to do so, vulnerable workers can move into private areas of the workplace. So if ICE comes into the lobby and there are folks maybe milling about in the hallway, they can always go step into a private office. Please, if confronted by ICE, say, I wish to remain silent, and do so and remain silent. Again, use your Know Your Rights cards if you have them. You can call the rapid response hotline we discussed. And if there is a judicial warrant for arrest of a person, a valid one, that person should step outside the workplace and close the door behind them, protecting the others inside. It's also helpful in these situations to keep a record of what ICE did. You can write down names and contact information of witnesses, and you can get a receipt for any property taken. If it is safe for you to do so and possible given the circumstances, you can discreetly record what's happening. And if you're reaching into a pocket for a phone or into a jacket for a phone, you can describe that that's what you're doing and that you're going to exercise your right to record just to keep you safe and maintain, not to escalate any situation and keep yourself safe. One of the best things that employers can do, and you can also do this on private property, so for example in this space, you can clearly define public and private spaces. So if an area is open to the public, it is open to ICE and to law enforcement more generally. So some things that kind of can delineate a public space from a private space include locks, key cards, keys, fobs, things that restrict access. Signs can also do that. So you could have, if there's an office, you could have private office or clients only, or like with permission of staff only, or something like that to designate that it's not a public space. Walls and barriers can also do this. These are some spaces that you can consider. So private offices are pretty good private spaces. Intake office, a waiting room, maybe if it's blocked off by a wall. But if it's, open to folks who immediately enter, maybe it's a public space. Parking lot is often more of a public space. And stairs leading up to the entrance of the building are more likely going to be a public space. This is an example of what we do at our offices, actually. So if you notice, we have some signs that say like private restricted area, only authorized personnel may enter. another sign that says you cannot proceed. And then on the right, you'll actually see that there's a freestanding sign. So even though there's no wall and no door, by putting that sign there, we're trying to delineate between what precedes that sign is maybe that's a public space, but everything after it is going to be a private space. So those are things to consider. You can bring it up to your own employer. You can do it here, but it helps to create more areas for folks to be protected by the requirement of a valid judicial warrant. And that is the end of our presentation. Thank you so much for listening to all the information that we've presented today. We're going to leave we have plenty of time for questions. So I'll just mention before we get into questions that you can contact us with our telephone number Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. You can also visit our website. Our website has a lot of this information on it. You can browse through the different resources. We have we have flyers here in person as well, but all of these, I don't know where the camera, all of these are accessible on our website. So please take a look. You can also submit an intake form on our website if you don't want to call. So you can describe if you're facing any sort of legal issue in one of the areas we can help with. You can submit that online and we will give you a call back once we've had a chance to review it. So with that, we can get into questions.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate that. So those that are watching at home, please type your questions in the chat box and we'll get to it, inshallah. We'll take the questions from the room first. So I'll go around with the microphone. Just raise your hand, please.
Yeah, thank you for the session. It was very helpful. One question I have is that you mentioned about the burner phone, right? If it's inevitable to carry your actual smartphone as well, do you scrub it and switch it off and have it in your, carry-on bags? Is that okay?
Yeah, that's one option. Like if you really have to take your smartphone, you can't just leave it here in the US, then definitely encrypt it. Make sure that so that there's a number password, not facial recognition. You can, like you said, you can scrub it. You can make sure everything is backed up to a secure iCloud drive. And then when you get off the airplane, you can turn off the phone and put it in your bag and not have it on and not have it on you. Then it's more secure. Those are some things you can do if you have to take it with you. And you can do the same for your laptop as well. Oh yeah, and you could also check it in your bag. That would probably be the best way. If you can go on the flight without it, then checking it in your bag would be a good idea. That's true. I mean, if they're gonna get it, they're gonna get it. But yeah, it's just you just have to weigh the pros and cons.
One other thing I would mention is that if you do go with a burner phone, it's likely that you don't have the numbers of like family members or attorneys saved on it. So in those situations, it's really helpful to like write your attorney's number on a piece of paper that you're going to carry on you. This also may happen if they, confiscate your device. So all the numbers that you need to have access to, carry in written form on your person, whether it's someone in the country you can alert if you're being detained or your attorney. Just have those separate from your phone, just so that you have them if you need them.
Yeah, that's really good advice.
Thank you for the presentation. I have a quick question. So if I'm a member of Global Entry or TSA Pre, is it better to use those when entering back in, or is it better to just go into the long line when entering, or doesn't matter?
I don't think it matters, because if they're gonna pull you aside, they're gonna pull you aside regardless of what line you're in. But if you have the advantage, you might as well just use it. There's no harm in you going through TSA Pre. But I did want to just inform you all, there was like a news article I read today that I believe in Canada you can get a Nexus card, which is like this card that is for low risk travelers, and it allows you to go back and forth between Canada and the US. And so I believe there's some Iranian-born Canadian citizens who were having their Nexus cards canceled, or were not able to use them when crossing the border. I haven't heard anything like that for TSA Pre or Global Entry, but just be aware, like if down the road that could happen. But right now it doesn't seem like that's the case, so why not use it?
One other thing to mention is that TSA Pre is with TSA and is not connected to border CBP, which is the officers that do customs and border protection. So I don't think it will have any effect since it only covers like how much you're screened in order to have access to the airport. But one thing that you can do separately, which less relates to what's going on now, but more relates to if you're kind of consistently questioned a lot, you can always apply for a redress number, which is essentially you file what's called a trip complaint, but it essentially gives you a file number. I don't necessarily think redress numbers will prevent the questioning that's happening now, since it's kind of systematic versus individualized. But if you think that's something that might help your situation, if you've been pulled aside for secondary questioning every time you've traveled for years, that's something that we can help you look into, or you can even apply for yourself. So I just wanted to let you know about that option.
Quick follow-up question. There's something else called Mobile Passport Control, which is a free service. Is that something recommended, or doesn't matter either also?
My understanding is that's just a way to fill out the paperwork on your mobile device before you actually, instead of having to fill out the written paperwork before you approach customs. It really, I don't think it will have an impact. One thing to note is, like, if you're carrying a burner phone, you probably don't want to put your login information for that app or your account for that app on your burner. So that might complicate it. I don't know if Roop maybe.
I'm actually not familiar with that one. So I think maybe a lot of these programs, like, they might not have too much of an impact when it comes to being questioned or searched at the border.
For non-U.S. citizens, what advice do you have specifically for taking domestic flights within the United States and being at the airport?
That's a really good question. So there have been some reports of people with valid visas being stopped domestically at airports. And so I'm not sure, like, I think if you have a visa, a temporary visa, and you are from a country that was previously on the ban list, I would urge you to contact an immigration attorney and consider not traveling domestically. If you are not from a country on the ban list, then it might be different, but you could still contact your attorney just to see whether you should travel. And then I would also recommend all visa holders not go near, like, or not travel across land border. So, like, going to Mexico or going to Canada, because you would be subject to the same types of stops, questioning, and detention at land borders as well.
What are your thoughts on denaturalization?
So this is something we've been monitoring. What we've seen in terms of denaturalization is that both honestly, Biden and Trump have put in a lot more resources into pursuing it. At this point in time, we're not seeing that many denaturalizations happen. However, it is something that is more of a concern now than it was, 10 years ago. Denaturalization is essentially the process by which naturalized citizens, so this means citizens who are not born here, it's essentially a process by which the government tries to claim either they were never qualified to become naturalized and revoke it in that way, or to say that they were naturalized due to some fraud or something like that. So there's different reasons why it might be pursued, which is why, it's important for also, naturalized citizens to consider the risks of certain activity. However, you should consult an attorney to see what your individual risk is. There's different bases on which they can justify, they can try to pursue a denaturalization. So depending on what you might fall under, it really can affect how at risk you actually are. For most people, it's a really low risk. But if you're concerned, please, you can reach out to us. There's other folks that can help advise you. We also have a resource on our website that kind of walks through what denaturalization is and lists some of the reasons why they might pursue it. And it says something like, if you fall in any of these categories, give us a call. So yeah, if you're at all concerned about that for yourself, you can reach out to us and we can help kind of figure out what your individualized risk may be.
Just a quick follow-up on that. I know you mentioned that if you're a citizen coming into the country, you cannot be stopped from entering the country, but can they detain you and then denaturalize you at that moment?
No, so they can detain you, but they cannot denaturalize you on the spot. There would be a whole long process for that, and you would have the right to an attorney. So just like they can't revoke your green card at the border, they can't denaturalize you. The only people who should be concerned is visa holders because they can deny them entry.
For denaturalization, it has to go through a process here domestically in the United States, and you will get a notice, which will allow you, I think it's something like 60 days in which to respond. So it's not something that A, would happen quickly, and B, could happen at the border. It would be a pretty lengthy process here, and you would have plenty of time to consult with an attorney. Yeah.
Thank you. All right. Any other questions? All right. And we're pretty quiet online as well, so we will call it a night, inshallah. Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much for the insights, and appreciate you. We look forward to having you back that time. Thank you so much.